Hello everybody. Today we are working on part 2 of lesson 1.2. We're still working on solving multi-step equations. Before we get started, let's make sure you've got all the materials you need to be successful today. So you need graph paper, spiral or loose leaf, whatever, or if you've still got your notes from 1.2 part 1, have those, and then you need pens or pencils or markers or whatever it is that's going to make you happy taking notes today. So as long as you've got all of those materials, go ahead and move on. If you don't have those materials, then press pause so you can go get them. Our lesson objective today is the same as it was the other day. We're still going to solve multi-step equations using those inverse operations. This is going to help us with more complex equations. We will also be working on writing equations to model different situations. So our focus today is using the distributive property to solve an equation. So the distributive property is multiplication. And the distributive property is evident when you have an equation that has parentheses. So if you see parentheses, I think that's how you spell parentheses. I'm a horrible speller. So I'll just put that little there. So if you have an equation and you notice that you've got parentheses in there, that pretty much is telling you you're going to need to use the distributive property first. So when we use that distributive property, it means multiply. So whatever number we've got on the outside of the parentheses, in this case a 2, we are going to distribute that to each term in the parentheses. And we're multiplying. So 2 times positive 1 is positive 2. 2 times a negative 5x, because that minus sign can be considered a negative sign. 2 times negative 5 is negative 10, and then we add the x. We didn't do anything with the plus 4, and it still equals negative 8. So we did the distributive property first. Now, when we look, before we move on, we notice that we've got some like terms. The 2 and the 4 can be combined. When we combine them, a positive 2 and a positive 4 is a positive 6. The negative 10x stays, and it still equals negative 8. Now we can solve our equation. The only x is on the left side, so I'm going to leave my variables on the left side, and I'm going to move everything else to the right side. So in this case, what needs to move? Absolutely right. The 6 needs to move. Right now, it's a positive 6. So what's the inverse of that? Negative. So we're going to subtract 6 from both sides. 6 minus 6 gives us the 0 that we want. We didn't do anything with the negative 10x, so we just bring that down. And then negative 8 minus 6. Remember your positive and negative numbers when subtracting. We keep the first number, we change the sign, and we change the sign on the second number. So it's a keep, change, change. And now we have negative 8 plus negative 6, which is negative 14. In order to get the x all by itself, remember, moody teenager, it wants to be alone. We divide by whatever the number in front is. By the way, that's called a coefficient. And we divide by the entire coefficient. So in this case, we're dividing by negative 10 on both sides. Okay. Now, I don't need to do the division per se on this, but it is a fraction and it's not in lowest terms. So negative 14 over negative 10. Well, both of those are even numbers, so I know I can divide them both by 2. So negative 7 over negative 5. Now, I can't divide 5 or 7 by anything. However, they're both negative, and a negative over a negative is like saying a negative divided by a negative, which means the whole answer is positive. So, improper fraction or mixed number, or if you're feeling daring, you can do the decimal. So there is your example. If you were so busy paying attention to the listening that you forgot to write this down, pause the video so that you can write down the example. You can even rewind it so you can listen to the example being talked through again as you're writing. If you're ready to move on, of course we've got some practice problems for you to do. And we are practicing distributive property. As you can see, there are parentheses in both of your problems. So at this time, you can pause the video so that you can copy down the practice problems if you did not print off the notes. And you can either practice solving them on your own and then check your work with me, or you can follow along while I do it. Maybe you want to try A on your own and then come back and do B with me since there's a decimal in B. Don't be afraid. It's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Pause the video if you want to try working these on your own first. So distributive property says I multiply by every term. Negative 3 times x is negative 3x. Negative 3 times positive 2 is negative 6. The plus 5x and the negative 9 stay the same. I'm noticing that I've got like terms. I have a negative 3x and a positive 5x. Those are like terms that we can combine. Negative 3, positive 5. This is like saying that Mr. Butler owes me $5 and he's paid me $3, although that doesn't work because we're not talking negatives. It's just subtraction. So it's just 5 minus 3, which is 2, positive 2, and then an x. And the negative 6 stays, and the negative 9 stays. And now we are ready to move things using inverse operations. So the first thing you want to do is always your distributive property. That's the first step in any equation. If you've got distributive property, then use it. The second step is like terms. Then you can go into moving things using inverse operations. My x is on the left side, so that's where it's going to stay. Everything else will move to the right. What needs to move? This negative 6. The opposite of that is positive 6. The 2x we bring down because we didn't do anything with it. Negative 6 and positive 6 gives us 0. And then negative 9 plus 6. Okay, here's where it is. If I owe Mr. Butler $9 and I pay him $6, how much do I still owe him? I still owe him $3. Okay. And in order to get the x all by itself, remember it's being multiplied, so I divide. Okay. And negative 3 over 2 is actually reduced, so our answer can be negative 3 over 2, or negative 1 and 1/2, or negative 1.5. Any one of those answers is correct, as long as everything's reduced and you've got the negative in front of it. Let's go ahead and take a look at letter B. I notice that I've got parentheses, so I need to use my distributive property first. So 1.5 times 2, I'll go ahead and do that math up here. I'm good with that. 1.5 times 2, 5 times 2 is 10. 2 plus times 1 is 2, plus 1 is 3. I have a decimal point 1 spot, so that would come out to 3. All right, so the 5 stays, and 1.5 times 2d comes out to be 3d, and 1.5 times a negative 1 is a negative 1.5, and it equals 0.5. Don't be afraid of the decimals. Show them who's boss. Now that I've done the distributive property, I do notice that I've got like terms that I need to combine. So let's go ahead and combine those like terms. A positive 5 and a negative 1.5 gives me a positive 3.5. This is like saying I have $5 and I spent $1.50. So how much do I have left? $3.50. I just don't need to put that 0. The 3D stays and it still equals 0.5. Now that I have used the distributive property, I have combined like terms. Now I'm ready to move things using inverse operations. The D is on the left side, so I will leave it there. And everything else is going to move to the right side. What needs to move? The positive 3.5. So it's positive, so I'm going to subtract it from both sides. Okay. That gives me 0. The 3D I didn't do anything with, so it gets brought down. And then 0.5 minus 3.5 gives me a negative 3.0, or just negative 3. In order to get the D all by itself, it's being multiplied. So I'm going to divide on both sides. 3 divided by 3 is 1, leaving me with 1D, or just D. And then negative 3 divided by positive 3 leaves me with a negative 1. And there you go. I hope those went well. If you have any questions, please make sure to write those questions down so that you can ask Mr. Butler or myself when you're in class tomorrow.